Hey, welcome back. And this video is not about all the development costs as I promised, but this video is about something else which is important to do before you start allocating all these costs. And the reason being, when you got all these costs, you could remember all the costs that would go in at different stages of the development, or at different cost heads and so on. So putting all these costs in is not an issue. What is important is that this section here, that you need to have a start date or when you anticipate that cost to occur in your project. So this is one of the most important concepts of doing a property development feasibility. And the reason I was holding it back till now is because it wasn't required. Like all the dates and everything that we entered so far were not really that detailed. However, now that we are getting into all this detail, this timeline concept needs to be addressed, and you need to understand this to better understand and plan your costs and project your cash flows into the future. So let's start by understanding the different stages that we have in a development project. So we will always have a stage for land acquisition. So the time when you sign a contract, you settle on the property, or you close the sale, so to speak, and then you go through your town planning, which is your zoning process, or your municipality or your council, as it is known in different parts of the world. And then you've got stage 3, which is your building permit. What that is doing is that once you've got a permit to develop a certain development, and it's gone through your council, gone through your town planning, and it's gone through your zoning department or whatever, but then you're getting ready for construction. So your building has to comply with all the building codes that your country might have. So that's this process here. Then we've got another process, which is marketing, and then the construction, the main construction that happens, and then the closing of all the sales or the settlements for all of them. And then we have, I always have this stage 7, which is basically from start to finish, which is what I explained in one of the first videos when we were talking about the masturbator. And I do that because right now I'm thinking from the point of view of all the costs that were incurred throughout the development. So there will be some costs that may or may not fall into any of these. So they might start here and then continue to occur all throughout, but they are not marketing costs, they are not building permit costs, they are not town planning costs. There could be certain costs that could fall outside, and that is just my way of having a stage allocated to all that miscellaneous expense that may incur throughout the development. So, but the key thing important to understand here is that your land acquisition, you could sign the contract here, but not settle on the land up until 6 months down the track, because you could, sign a contract and have a 6-month or 12-month settlement period. That means that you signed the contract, you paid the deposit, but you don't have to close the sale or settle on the property until 12 months, because you've negotiated these terms with the seller or with the vendor. But if your site hasn't got a permit to develop whatever you want to develop, you will see that this town planning section, you have to go through that. Now, going through town planning and going through the zoning department is not dependent upon whether or not you own the project, whether or not you own the site, because you could negotiate again with the seller and have these terms within your contract that allows you to go through the planning, or you could settle on it subject to getting a planning permit approval before you move forward. So whatever the case is, you need to be able to put that in perspective in terms of dates, in terms of timeline. So this is just a screenshot from one of my previous projects, but it has nothing to do with our current project or the feasibility that we are doing, and I'll show you exactly how that works. But what I'm trying to say is that unless you've got a permit, there are dependencies in there. So unless you've got a permit, you can't go into your building permit, which is going through your construction drawings, going through all your working drawings, and getting it approved by the building department or the building surveyor in certain countries, who can authorize, okay, everything that you're trying to build is detailed, it has everything that needs to be there, and it is as per the construction code set up by the building authority or the construction authority in the country that you are in. So these things have to go through that process, but they can't go through that unless you've got a permit, because these drawings are based on what you've been approved to build. And also, especially if you want to start your marketing and pre-sales, unless you have a product of what you are going to be building and selling, you can't really sell anything for pre-sales because you don't know. You haven't really got an approval for it. So your marketing efforts cannot start up until your town planning or zoning is completed. So these two things can start simultaneously, because marketing does not require your construction detail drawings, but construction detail drawings that happen in your building permit are required for the construction to start. So unless they come in first, your construction cannot start. And then once your construction finishes, that is the only time when whatever you have sold in your marketing efforts can be settled on or can be closed. All those sales can be closed. So this is the part that I wanted to explain. Now let's look at the same thing. I just created this. This is not part of the, like, this sheet is not part of the Lead Developer Suite. I just created it to reflect the development and the dates for it. So if we look at this carefully, and I can zoom in a little bit more so we can see it better. So we had stages called land acquisition, town planning, building permit, marketing, sales, construction, settlements, and then we have one stage allocated to from start to finish. Whatever miscellaneous doesn't fall under any of the above 6 categories, I can allocate those costs in there. So let's say here we've got 1st of February. Now this 1st of February is basically the date we set, that we are going to start. Now, as I explained earlier, when it comes to development timeline, it's always month to month. It does not matter if it was 3rd of February or 15th of February or 15th of August or whatever. It will automatically take that as the start of the month. So this is our timeline. So over here we are actually settling on the block of land on 1st of June. That means that's when our interest is going to start occurring. Now this is important because these timelines and dates are also going to be used in our finance section, and that is why it is important to understand this. Where did I get this from? I basically got this from the start of the project. We had assumed that our loan for this would start on 1st of June and would be paid out after 6 months. The duration for the loan is going to be 6 months, because that is what we anticipate before we are ready for construction. And those things have to, those dates are based on what we had assumed in our project setup. So if I go back into our timeline, this is what's happening. But this light blue section here could be, because this is the date when you started the analysis, which is the analysis start date right here. Now this could be the date where you sign the contract but do not settle up until that point, because over here this period is the period that we will be paying interest. We'll be paying interest for 6 months after we settle, because there is a loan associated with it. So this period is purely to calculate the cash flow that will be outgoing. But you could be making expenses here that could be related to town planning, could be related to your project start to finish, all different cost heads or whatever. That doesn't stop you from posting those cash flows over here that you would have spent on your due diligence reports, whatever you would have got. So you can put that in. You can put those in starting from 1st of February, which means that if I'm in my development cost section over here, And when I was setting up, I had already set up the entity. So let's say, for example, the development entity setup, which could be an LLC or a trust or a company, or whatever kind of structure that you were thinking. Now, I could have set this up as soon as I had signed the contract here. I could have set this up in March, no problem. But this is when I'm allocating that cost. So let's say when I signed the contract was in the same month I did this feasibility. Let's say it was February. And if I come back here, if I go back into my development costs and I say, okay, I did everything in February and I don't settle until June. And, I should have just set up this cost, this entity, in March itself. So this is important because you are trying to ascertain the costs that you will be incurring every month. The whole purpose of doing this feasibility is so that you can find out what are my outgoings in the month of September when I'm in the middle of my development, or I'm a quarter into my development. So this is why it is important, so that you can project these costs in the future. So we know that's where this is going to be. So anytime I've got certain costs that I'm incurring before all this is happening, it could happen it could be related to any of these. You might get a report that's not required up until construction starts. I'll give you a very good example, like soil test does not happen in Victoria or in Melbourne, for example. We don't need to get a soil test up until we are ready for the building permit, or getting documentation ready for the building permit. However, in a site where I feel that there's going to be a lot of rock there or bedrock there or whatever, I might bring that up right here and say, look, this is part of my due diligence and I need to get that soil report here. But in most scenarios where we already know the kind of soil that we'll encounter, or we do not suspect the bedrock to come in, or for example, if you are a developer and you've already been developing in the area, and you are just developing up the road, or you already are aware, so you wouldn't have that soil test come in. You wouldn't engage a geotechnical surveyor or an engineer at the start of the project, because you're familiar with the area, you know what it is, so you don't have to spend that money in the month of February. You might decide to spend that money, let's say, when we are ready for our building permit, which is somewhere around this point. So I've postponed all my cash flow for 6-7 months so that I can juggle my cash flow. So as your number one job as a developer is to juggle your cash flow all the time. And that is the reason of this feasibility. So you can plan and juggle your cash flow with this. So in your town planning, that is, I'm going through my zoning application here. Let's say I've got 1, 2, 3, or my planning application over here. So I've got I suspect that if I go into planning in March, I should be out of my planning in July. Now, this is a mock feasibility. I'm doing it so that I can touch every aspect of the feasibility and show you the different features that Lead Developer Feasibility Suite has in it. So, but if I was to focus on only one kind of development, I wouldn't be able to touch on all the features that it has to offer. So that is why I'm just trying to touch on everything. So and we know that after town planning, we will have the next stage, which is going to be a building permit, which is when we go through to get all our construction drawings and the way we're going to build, and get that compliance out of the way, and get an approval that we are okay to build as per the residential code. Now, marketing, again, as I was saying, does not have to wait for the construction drawings to come up. It can start immediately after you've got your permit. So let's say your marketing and sales start here, and you could go up for 4 months and realize that, okay, I've done my pre-sales and I don't need to continue all my marketing efforts after that point. So for example, I can just take this off and reset this portion. So my marketing starts here and finishes here. But depending upon the kind of project that you have, you might realize that your marketing efforts may have to run, like you might have all your pre-sales that you need for the lender to be able to get your construction loan. You might have that all done in the first 4 months. However, if you want to sell all your stock, it could be required for you to continue your marketing efforts for another 4 months or something. So let's say your marketing starts here and finishes sometime here. So that at that point you have sold all the stock, or it could go all the way till the end, or it could start here. You know what I mean? The reason it's there is so that all we want to figure out is that how we are planning this project, and we can get these dates. So we know that our marketing costs, so when we are allocating all the costs that we have for marketing. So let's say I've got my marketing stuff happening. Let me just zoom out a little bit so we can quickly see where we are at. So let's just collapse all of them. And my marketing stuff is right here. Where did it go? Selling and marketing costs right here. So if I come here and I say, okay, I've got to start advertising this. All I want to know is that when I do this advertising, I'm going to spend, let's say, $1,500 for a listing on a website that helps me sell my stock. So, or I go to an agent and they say, look, you'll have to, publish an ad in a magazine or something like that, or do Facebook advertising or whatever. So you can come in and put in the details for this. And what we want to find out from this timeline is that when do I allocate this? Because it's very difficult to go left and right and keep guessing this unless you plan your timeline before you start putting in all these costs. Now, it was easier to do that for the first two sections of the feasibility, but this will get difficult, especially if you want to accurately project your cash flow. So let's say here, and I go in my section and I see that it's starting in August. I can come back into my development sheet, and over here I can select 1st of August, and that is going to be a single expense, for example. I'm gonna hire an interior designer who's gonna do all my joinery drawings, as well as they're gonna do all the specifications for me and finalize all the color schemes and everything that I would need for all my interiors. But I know that my joinery drawings and my interior designer are going to cost me about $4,500. And I have a good relationship with this person, so I am going to allow this. So I would now this stuff is I would need that for my marketing stuff. So let's look at our timeline again. So we're looking at our timeline and we're thinking, so if I start my marketing here, that means something has to happen somewhere else. So maybe I need to get my interiors. Now I can't start anything unless I know what is going on, but you can more or less start a process somewhere around this point. So let's say you're looking at June, so you can start that process when you are settling, because you know that in 2 months time you will have all of these things, and your interior designer could say, look, you can pay me every month for the next 3 months, and we will have all the preliminary stuff sorted before you've got a permit, and we'll finalize them after you got a permit. So this process could start over here, and that's all about planning. That is you trying to figure out what these costs are going to be or when they're going to occur. So if that happens, and I start this in, let's say, just before August, let's say in June sometime, and that is fine, because by August I'm ready for advertising, because this is an expense where I'm ready, I'm going on the market. That means my interior stuff is already ready. So these are the things that you have to think of before you start allocating these costs to a timeline, because everything that you do here will then get distributed across in this section. So let's say you've got interior designer, and as I said, that person will allow me 4 payments, so I can make 4 payments, and it goes on for 4 months. And the payments that I have could be moderately spaced out based on the amount of time that they spend on this. So I can select S-curve, moderate, and I'm not going to press save and refresh right now, because I want to come in and put in all the details and only press that once because I don't really need to do that. It is all about planning. So what you're doing is going to and fro. I would usually, to make things easier, right now the whole screen's filled with the sheet so that you can get a better view of these things. But what I will usually do is plan my timeline, and then all I do is take a screenshot and I open it on the side, so that when I'm allocating these costs, I'm not going to and fro with my dates and all the cost allocation that I need to do for every month. So I keep that open. I'll put it here so that I've got 3 screens actually, so I can just drag it on the side and keep looking at it. I'll give you a glimpse here. It's on another screen, and then I can come back and start working in my development cost section. So this is about timeline. When you start the next video, I would have input all the costs and everything.